We're back. Okay. We're getting down to the end here. I mean, look at this. Look how much we've read, how much is left. Chapter 36, in which I discover the maple tree and a few truths about Chemung County. Remember, Chemung County is where she was from in New York, where her and Gemma lived together. Not lived together, where her and Gemma grew up and were friends. The memories suddenly came rushing back to me. Gemma used to put grasshoppers in my hair to frighten me, and I liked to put June bugs on her shoulders to give her a shock. A little chill of excitement ran through me as I realized how good Gemma's clues had been. I marched along the dirt boulevard, the weather bright and sunny despite the February cold. I skipped over a puddle as I hustled past homes painted bright white or yellow. They had wide wooden porches and pointy roofs. There was 1 or 2 stone mansions tucked behind thick shrubs and wrought iron fences. Finally, I reached the corner of 17th and Locust Streets, staring up at a gray stone house with a wide black door in the middle of it. I was breathless. More from nerves in a tight corset than actual exertion. I like that. So she's breathless, out of breath. Suffix less means without, so she's out of breath. But it's more about nerves than like actual like exercise and being tired. I saw someone moving across the yard with a rake, tending to the broken twigs and dead leaves, but otherwise the house was silent. Now that I was here, I had no earthly idea what I was going to do. I couldn't just saunter up to the door of those refined Philadelphians and ask to have tea with the maple tree. What was I thinking? I began to pace back and forth, turning ideas around in my mind. You've grown into a real lady, Miss Cornelia, came a deep voice. I turned, peering over a spindly shrub, and found myself gazing into the gentle face of Gemma's father, old Joseph Tuthill. He was a solid man, just half a head taller than I was, though I remembered him being as big as a tree, a maple tree. Sturdy and strong, that was old Joseph. His hair was white with age, but his face was the same as when I knew him back in my days with Gemma in Chemung County. You've got your father's eyes and mouth, that's for certain, but you're a real lady. I caught my breath, searching for where to begin. That's kind of you to say, Mr. Tuthill, I stammered, my joy at seeing him nearly leaving me speechless. I wish I could see how Gemma grew up. I bet she's a real lady now, too. He nodded sadly, and hesitated for a moment, and I wished I could scoop the air around me and pull those words back into my mouth. I love that. Scoop the air and pull those words back. Because she's talking about Gemma, and he's obviously not with Gemma, okay? It probably pained him to think about Gemma and the rest of his family. Gemma said she hadn't seen her daddy for years. He pointed over towards a cluster of fir trees on the far side of the yard, where we could speak more privately. A few ladies pushing baby prams, strollers, passed us, and Mr. Tuthill tipped his hat to each of them in a friendly manner. His eyes seemed to take in everything around us, and the thought struck me that as a conductor on the Underground Railroad here, he was probably a good detective too. Meaning he's really paying attention. I got word from St. Catherine's about you coming. I hear you're wanting to know about your daddy and his brother, Mr. Matthew, he said, running his fingers through his trim gray beard. I'm real sorry for your loss. He got word from St. Catherine's. Was that the original place where she was after her parents died and they had contacted him? I nodded, unsure of whether my voice had left me. I noticed old Joseph's hands were calloused and scarred, as knobby as tree bark. Simile. Miss Cornelia, your daddy was my friend. And what happened to his brother Matthew that night was a tragedy. I'll never forget it. Drove his widow right out of town, as I recall. That's Aunt Kitty. Aunt Kitty's the widow. That's right, I said. She's my Aunt Kitty. I'm trying hard to set things right with her, but she'll need more than my word about what happened, Mr. Tuthill. She'll need evidence. He nodded some more and stared into my face like his mind was falling back through time. And I suspect it was. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. It suddenly felt reckless being here with old Joseph, stirring up the ashes of my family's past. Why didn't I just let it die out? Why was I chasing down ghosts like this? When I heard Matthew Warren on his horse that night, we were in the woods a good ways off from the farms. Gemma's mama was at the front with the babies. Gemma was with me at the back. She was sad to leave you, her best friend, that was for sure. I didn't speak, the pictures of that night coming to life in my mind like I was there too, instead of tucked safely away in my bed and sleeping. Your daddy Cornelius was out in front leading us to the river. The babies were crying. They were so tired and out of sorts. It was long past midnight, and we'd been walking along a dried-up creek bed for a few hours already. That's when a man came riding up toward us. We could almost feel the hoofbeats. Okay, remember that they had found out that people were coming to get the black people and then sell them as slaves. So they were kind of trying to escape, okay? That's when the man came riding up towards us. There had been slave hunters thereabouts, so every one of us was shaken with fear. This man on horseback, he must have heard us, heard one of the babies crying, and he came riding up and he called for us to stop. But nothing was stopping your daddy. Old Joseph paused and scratched his beard before going on. There was no moon that night. Sometimes I think if there had been, maybe Cornelius Warren would have recognized his own brother. But he didn't. And in the rush of panic that swept over all of us, your daddy fired his gun. The man that came up on the horseback, do you know who it is now? And it was so dark, there was no moon, and so he took out his gun and trying to protect everybody. I swallowed hard, but my mouth was as dry as cotton. Simile. We ran as fast as we could, but a bloodhound caught our trail and started barking. Right away, Gemma knew that hound dog, and she raced ahead to catch up with your daddy. "That's Matthew Warren's dog, Mr. Cornelius," she told him. And that's when we knew something terrible had just happened. We were so far from home, we pushed onto the river where a conductor was waiting with a skiff. Small boat. I helped Gemma and the babies get in. I kissed Gemma's mama goodbye. Then I sent them to follow the drinking gourd. That North Star would have to lead them on to Canada without me. I was torn, but I couldn't leave your daddy like that, knowing his own brother might be lying dead back behind us in the woods. We'd grown up together, our families. We were silent for a few moments. Then he reached one of his knobby brown hands into his coat and felt around over his heart. He produced a small picture frame no bigger than his palm. It was a deep crimson with gold trim, and a swirly gold inlay framed the image. I leaned in close. My breath could have steamed the delicate glass case. It was a daguerreotype of a man and a woman. It was probably their wedding day, I assume, judging by the bride's veil and gown, simple though they were. Her eyes were intense, staring so fiercely up at me from the copper plate that I recognized her right away. I don't know what that word is, but it's some type of picture, obviously, of a man and a wife, like on their wedding day. "Aunt Kitty," I whispered. Then my gaze shifted to the groom. And Uncle Matthew. I couldn't recall his face, but seeing him here, it all comes back to me now. I had a sudden recollection of booming laughter and the thick smell of pipe tobacco. I remembered teasing and mischief and strong arms swinging me into the air. Uncle Matthew was like Detective Webster in his joking and boundless sense of joy. I held on to it to give it to his widow. After I got word from St. Catherine's, I've been holding it for you, old Joseph said, his voice growing more urgent. You take it to Kitty now. You tell her it was an accident what happened to her Matthew. He'd gotten wind of Cornelius helping my family escape to freedom, just as some slave hunters showed up back in town. Matthew was riding out to warn us when he died. He was doing something brave, Matthew was. And Cornelius? He didn't mean what happened. I saw it myself. Cornelius Warren lived the rest of his days in despair over shooting Matthew. That's why the drinking and the gambling got worse. That's why he left your mama, your brothers, and you to fend for yourselves on the farm. I couldn't speak for the knot that had tied itself around my heart. I kept staring at the image of Aunt Kitty as a bride, so soft and sweet-looking, the only picture she'd ever sat for in her life. I thought about her and Matthew. And my daddy? He did good too, your daddy, old Joseph continued. I want you to remember that. Now you hear me. Cornelius Warren would never forget what happened to his brother, and neither could I. So that's why we both carried on. And I knew exactly what he meant by that. Carried on. Gemma's daddy was in Philadelphia helping slaves find their way to freedom. That's why he didn't live with Gemma and her mama and the rest of the family in Canada. He couldn't. Not with the ghosts of Matthew Warren and his own brother Ezekiel haunting his mind all these years. And my daddy had been haunted too. But what about him? I asked old Joseph, my voice husky with sadness. How did Cornelius die? Old Joseph shook his head, his eyes searching my face in confusion. I thought you knew, Miss Cornelia. Those same slave catchers came back again and again. He paused for a long time, then he closed his eyes. They weren't just after slaves that time. His body washed up in the Chemung River. I felt a sob catch in my throat, but I trapped it just in time. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, wiggling my feet in those heavy boots. And suddenly I understood what it meant to have faith in someone. Faith wasn't about evidence and eyewitnesses like with Aunt Kitty and Mr. Pinkerton's other detectives. Faith was something you knew inside, from your heart all the way to the tips of your toes. Gemma will, you know, too, I said. Carry on, that is. She wanted me to tell you that she's coming to join you, Mr. Tuthill. I don't know when or how, but Gemma means to carry on too, and I believe she will. I reached up my hand, intending to tuck the delicate gold frame under my bonnet, but I stopped myself. This was too important. Gemma's daddy was looking at me with those wise old eyes, and I felt the weight of all the years and all the ghosts. I pulled a linen hanky from my sleeve and gently wrapped the delicate frame in it. Then I slipped it into the pocket of my flowing green skirt, and I knew I wouldn't be able to let go until I reached Aunt Kitty. That was hard. In which the chapter was called, in which I discovered the maple tree and a few truths about Chemung County. So we learned about what happened to Matthew, and then we actually learned about what happened to her dad, that the slave catchers killed her father because they knew that he was helping slaves, not slaves, he was helping Black people escape. He was helping. He was brave. And then that's actually how he ended up dying. Oh, that was a hard one.